Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most powerful anti-war essays ever written, Leo Tolstoy's Bethink Yourselves. He published it back in 1904 as this massive cry of conscience against the Russo-Japanese War. Okay, so let's just dive right in. You gotta understand, Tolstoy wrote these words in a state of just utter shock. For him, the start of this war wasn't some distant political event, it was a horrifying plunge into collective insanity. It was this dreadful reality that felt more like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from.
So, we'll start with that idea right there in Section 1, a dreadful reality. To Tolstoy, this war wasn't just about politics or military strategy. No, he saw it as a deep, profound moral and spiritual collapse, a collective madness.
And what just absolutely horrified him was this central glaring irony. I mean, think about it. He points out that on one side you have Buddhists whose faith forbids killing any living thing. And on the other side you have Christians who are all about brotherhood and love. And yet here they were, hunting each other down like wild animals. For Tolstoy, this contradiction was all the proof he needed that the world had gone completely insane. But you know who he really pointed the finger at? It wasn't the average soldier, no. His sharpest criticism was for the educated class. You know, the professors, the journalists, the politicians, the people who he believed knew how cruel and pointless war was, but still pushed for it, sending their unfortunate, defrauded brothers off to die in their place. So how does this even happen? How does an entire society fall into this madness? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the Great Deception. Tolstoy believed this was only possible through a massive, society-wide lie. Let's look at how he just dismantles the official reasons for the war, piece by piece.
He heard all the rallying cries, right? For the fatherland, for the faith, for the king, and he saw them for exactly what he believed they were, a very sophisticated web of lies. In his mind, these were just abstract ideas used to trick regular people into committing the most terrible crime imaginable.
And this, right here, this gets to the absolute heart of his argument. Tolstoy completely reframes patriotism. It's not a virtue, he says. It's a powerful tool of deception. It is the mechanism the state uses to convince good people that murdering their fellow human beings is not only okay, but that it's actually a noble and virtuous thing to do.
He argued this deception was basically a conspiracy that involved every single level of the state. The rulers said it was for national glory. The diplomats claimed it was for peace. The journalists framed it as a fight for civilization. And, maybe most damning of all, the clergy offered God's blessing for what Tolstoy saw as the work of the devil.
So if you follow this path of lies and violence, where does it lead? For Tolstoy, it only leads to one place, and that's Section 3, the precipice, what he called humanity's total self-destruction.
And he uses this incredibly bleak but powerful metaphor to describe it. He says humanity, divided into all these nations armed against each other, is like a bunch of spiders trapped in a jar. They can't do anything else, they're just destined to devour one another until nobody is left. So what about the usual fixes? You know, international courts, political alliances, bigger weapons? Tolstoy had zero faith in any of them. He thought they were all doomed to fail. And why? Because they never got to the root of the problem. The moral corruption inside each person, and the willingness to kill for some abstract idea. Okay, so after laying out this pretty grim diagnosis, Tolstoy finally offers his cure. And let me tell you, it's radical. This brings us to Section 4, Bethink Yourselves. And that's not just a title. For him, it was the entire prescription for humanity's survival.
Tolstoy's call to bethink yourselves is a demand for a complete spiritual awakening. He's urging every single person, from the czar on his throne to the peasant soldier in the mud, to just stop. Stop what you are doing and ask the most fundamental questions you can. Who am I? What is my purpose?
And here's the crucial point. Once you actually ask those big questions, you're faced with a really stark choice, a fork in the road. Do you follow your duty to the state, which is telling you to commit violence and murder? Or do you obey what Tolstoy calls the higher will of God, this universal law that demands love and service to your neighbor? For him, it's simple. You cannot do both.
And there it is. That's his solution. Real lasting change is never going to come from governments or treaties or courts. It can only come from one place, the conscience of each individual person, choosing to act on that higher law.
Which brings us to our final section, number 5, an individual's choice. And to prove this isn't just some abstract philosophy, Tolstoy grounds his entire argument in the gut-wrenching voices coming from the front lines.
He actually included letters like this one in his essay.
Just think about this soldier. He feels like he has to go. The state is making him. But in his heart, he's already made his choice. He'll obey the state with his body, but he's going to obey his conscience with his soul. He will not kill.
And then there's this desperate question from another soldier that just perfectly captures that feeling of being trapped. Where can one escape? You know the system is wrong. You know what you're being asked to do is evil, but you feel so tangled up on all sides that there's just no way out.
And listen to these questions from a seaman in the middle of a siege. They're absolutely heartbreaking. They show you the deep spiritual crisis that war creates. The state is saying one thing, the church is saying one thing, but his soul is asking something else entirely. Is it true that God loves war? This is the inner conflict Tolstoy wanted to shine a light on.
And so, this is where Tolstoy leaves us. He totally reframes war. It's not about a conflict between Russia and Japan, or any two countries for that matter. No, it's a battle that's waged inside every single human soul. It's a choice between obeying power and being true to your own conscience. And that question, when the state demands murder, what does your conscience demand of you? Well, more than a century later, it hasn't lost any of its terrible, urgent power.